And welcome, everyone, to the Leave Us Alone podcast this week. We're going to be talking about a topic, the latest nightmare from the Internal Revenue Service, the IRS, and that is government-run tax prep by George Soros. The effort to have the government do your taxes for you, and then they just send you the bill. And you go, how'd you come to this, right? And we'll see how that unravels as it's moving forward. The federal government's putting money into it. They want to do this, and some of the hard left really wants to do this. We'll be talking about that in just a moment. But please take a moment during the podcast to subscribe to the podcast. We'd love to have you join through Apple Podcasts and or Spotify. And if you're watching the live stream, please be sure to subscribe to Americans for Tax Reform YouTube channel or like us on Facebook. Getting back to the podcast topic this time, the idea of the government doing your taxes. Right now, we have in the United States, unlike many other countries, a voluntary tax system. Doesn't mean it's voluntary to pay your taxes. It means you do your own taxes. You look at your books, you look at your numbers, and you send the government what is owed. They check it, and then we're all set. Other countries, the government knows already how much you got paid. They know all your financial data. They can look at all your bank accounts. They have all your information, and then they write your tax return for you. And if you want to argue with them, well, you can argue with City Hall, not terribly successfully, but if you argue with the IRS, first of all, as of today, only 20% of their phone calls, when you come in to ask, what was this all about? Why did you have this number? Only 20% of the phone calls get answered. And you can call and call again. You can write letters and they disappear into the void. And you will have to pay the tax and then argue to get it back. Of course, you could hire a lawyer for several $1,000s to dispute the fact that they took $500 more than they should have. But you want to just give them the $500? You want to spend a couple $1,000s arguing about the five, and maybe you never get through on the phone. Maybe you never get this solved at all. This is an incredible violation of your privacy. Right now, the government has to know certain things about you, your W-2, your 1099, how much money did you make, those sorts of things. And banks tell the government, or your employer tells the government what your paycheck was, so they can check it and see if you're basically paying your income tax correctly. What the government asked for under Biden just recently, remember the 1099 explosion where they said, we want to have, if you get a Venmo notice that somebody sent you $600 through Venmo during the course of a year, that's going to be reported to the government as income. Now, you can go back and argue that it was you and your friends getting together to pay the rent, and that's what those checks were, but you're going to have to go make that argument to the government. We're joined today by Mike Pallitz, who is in charge of tax policy here at Americans for Tax Reform. And Mike has been keeping an eye on the IRS. I just started Mike into a little rant about some of the reasons I'm not terribly excited about the IRS doing my taxes or anybody else's. Your thoughts, Mike, on government privacy, on your privacy vis-a-vis the government?
Yeah, Grover, thanks for having me. Quick note here for people to know. One, in the Inflation Reduction Act, the reconciliation bill, the spending and tax mess passed by Democrats last August, included $15 million for the IRS to create a pilot program and a study to look at government-run tax prep, which they call direct e-file or return-free filing. And this would essentially have the IRS become the tax preparer, the collector, and the auditor. So there's obviously an inherent conflict of interest here. We should not have the IRS being the same organization that's going to audit you is also the same person that creates your taxes. And really, in one sense, it's having almost a pre-audit while you're doing your taxes because you're handing all your information over to the same service who's going to come and tell you, no, your taxes were actually filed improperly. And one of the real concerns taxpayers should have here is the additional burden that would be placed upon tax filers, the additional information you would have to hand over to the IRS. We've even seen progressive groups like the Progressive Public Policy Institute raise concerns over this, where they're essentially saying, well, the IRS, one, doesn't have the infrastructure or the ability to handle things such as the earned income tax credit, which is claimed by millions of Americans. Their concern is essentially, and what progressive studies have even shown, is that you'd have less people taking tax credits they're otherwise eligible for because of the information they have to hand over to the IRS. And again, I think this another point of concern we should have here is taxpayer privacy, where we've seen time and again a cultural problem at the IRS where they have a complete inability, lack of respect for taxpayers' private information, and then they mishandle that information. So we're now more than.
Can you tell people what happened 600 days ago, which speaks to the issue of whether the IRS is capable of keeping anyone's information private?
Sure. So now over more than 600 days ago, taxpayer information was stolen from the IRS. It was a theft. And that information was then handed over to the progressive media outlet ProPublica, which then published all of the private taxpayer information in the financial documents of certain individuals, specifically targeting certain billionaires. This wasn't a random hack of some site. This was someone who had the master keys to the IRS, who went and selected certain individuals to find their information and hand over to progressive media that then published it. And this, coincidentally just happened to be timed as Democrats started their major tax crusade with public messaging that they were going to raise taxes on the wealthy and not you, which of course is not true. But a politically timed theft of taxpayer information from the IRS and then given to progressive media to publish just again proves time and again that the IRS cannot be trusted to handle information. The idea that we would hand them more information to allow them to file your taxes for you is absurd.
In that case of thousands and thousands of people's tax returns and tax audits and information being handed to a left-wing group, not put on a website somewhere if somebody thought they were exposing problems, selectively given to a left-wing group that would only use it for left-wing purposes, not for any sort of general use. And they were claiming they were going to find that rich people weren't paying their taxes. As a matter of fact, that's not at all what showed up. And so they stole all that data, made it public, or much of it public. Some of it they probably used to blackmail people with to this day. But they didn't find any of the arguments that high-income people weren't paying taxes. These were audits, or they're not being audited. Many of the information that they had were audits that are supposed to never be happening. Whoever did this, as you point out, had the keys to the kingdom, could go anywhere in the IRS. That means it's one of the top people. Or they're so lax in their security that anybody can get a key to the kingdom, the master key, and they don't have the capacity to find out who. Or they know darn well who it is, and they choose not to tell anybody because it wasn't a theft, it was a smash and grab and hand off to somebody. But all of these things say you'd never give an organization, and nobody got fired. Why would you give these people anybody's personal information?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We've had Secretary Janet Yellen promise before Congress when this first happened back in 2021, in the summer of 2021, that the IRS would be held accountable, that they would get to the bottom of this. Now, here we are, more than 600 days since the theft of taxpayer information from the IRS. Not a single person's been fired, and the IRS can't or won't tell us what happened. And this will be a continuing subject as Secretary Yellen was in hearings in the House today and will be in the Senate next week. It's certainly a topic of interest.
Now, the IRS asked for and got $80 billion in addition to everything they have now, supposedly to hire 87,000 more staff. They admit that about 87,000 staff with $80 billion. About $3.2 billion will be used to hire people to answer the phones and service questions, and about 44 plus billion for guys to go audit you. So when the IRS commissioner was up for nomination, and he said that he would equally view more service and more audits, by a factor of 10, he wasn't telling the truth about what they were doing with that money. That money is not to make it easier for you to pay your taxes. It's to have more people out there auditing more folks, and hopefully, and remember the president just recently said, oh, we're going to tax billionaires, and that was the headline. And then it turned out that the IRS and the Justice Department and folks have been secretly organizing a plan to follow everybody who's paid in tips, waiters, waitresses, taxi cab drivers, people who do fingernails. That's their target, not billionaires, people who get tips. They're putting all this time and effort into making sure that people who make a living with tips as a major part of it are paying taxes on that. Mr. Biden, when you promised you'd never hit anybody who raised taxes on anyone who earned less than $400,000, please name 2 or 3 people who work for tips and make more than $400,000 a year. This is a war on average Americans.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in Danny Werfel, who will be the new IRS commissioner, in his hearing, he gave away the game for Democrats and kind of blew up their messaging that really what this is about is improving taxpayer services. His statement in the hearing to senators was that it would be a co-equal priority of improving taxpayer services and ramping up audits on people, which we know it won't be. There's nothing co-equal about it. The mandate he has is to go raise $200 billion by increasing audits on people so the Democrats can spend that money. So we know that'll be the priority of the IRS, and he all but confirmed that. And again, we have the topic now of the IRS. They cannot meet those existing taxpayer service requirements that they're obligated by Congress to hit, and they're seeking to expand their power. So part of what they've been doing now with this study to try and start grabbing the reins of doing tax preparation as well as to being auditors is who they've selected to run their study, their pilot program. They've selected a progressive group, the New America Foundation, an organization that's been on record for years in support of creating government-run tax prep. So this is a fully already baked in with the results study that we know the progressive group is going to come in and say, yeah, we think you should do government-run tax prep because that's what we've been advocating you to do for years. The IRS knows that. And then you have this added problem to it too, because of the specific work this organization, New America Foundation, has done so far. They'd even be a potential vendor for a new program. While the lights turned off.
Okay, so we've got a situation where the federal government gave $15 million to a left-wing lobby in order to tell the government back they should do what the left-wing lobby wanted. And then they'll say they checked with experts.
Yeah, and this is supposed to be an impartial study. That's the way it's written by the law. We'll see in hearings. I think it should absolutely be a topic for Republicans in the House and Senate to investigate of just how this process was done, how New America Foundation was selected as the group to prepare this study. Was there an open bid process for this, or did they just go out and hire the first group that they knew would give them the results they want? I think it should be deeply troubling. We've seen reporting from the Daily Caller on this, calling them out of having such a left-wing, clearly an impartial, not an impartial organization selected to run the study. Again, it gives away the game of what the IRS is here. Is they want to expand into the role of having your taxes from start to finish, from the moment you're filing them to the moment they're going to audit you. And it's something they certainly a role they're not prepared to take on, not equipped to, and would have a conflict of interest for them to do so.
So what will the IRS do with their $80 billion? Have they explained that? Has Congress written it down? Is it online somewhere?
So Secretary Janet Yellen had promised when the Inflation Reduction Act passed that within 6 months they would have a detailed spending program outlining exactly how they plan to use the $80 billion of taxpayer money they were being handed. Surprise, surprise, the IRS blew past that deadline. No plan has been offered. In Danny Werfel's hearings for Commissioner of IRS, he was asked whether or not he'd be able to commit to providing that plan this year. He wasn't able to do so. He said, well, let me go talk with the bureaucrats at the IRS to see if they think it's doable, not whether or not they're legally required to do it or that the Secretary Yellen promised that they would have it already. No, they haven't. They've outlined no plan of how they actually plan to spend that money. What we do know from previous Treasury Inspector General reports is outlining, one, that they do plan to hire 87,000 new agents. And what we do know from just the allocation of the money is that they certainly plan to come to ramp up enforcement and increase audits on Americans, which is what the majority of the money in the bill is used for.
December, a few months ago, there was a lot of unhappiness in the country over the Biden administration and the Democrats in Congress voted a law that Venmo and PayPal and Etsy and eBay were going to have to report any money you received through their platform as if it was income and send that to the IRS. Could you walk through where we are on that? Because I know one of the things that seemed to bother people is it's only $600. So it's if a bunch of friends are rooming together and they all Venmo the money to the one guy, he's now got income of all of that stuff that was just a pass through. It was just collecting the money to buy the pizza or rent the house. And if you haven't kept receipts, you owe the federal government taxes on all that stuff that Venmo had to tell the federal government about. It sounded like a disaster in the making. There was a fair amount of noise. What's the status of, did that get repealed?
Quickly, for people who are not familiar, prior to Democrats passing the misnamed America Rescue Plan, the first COVID bill the Biden administration passed, one of the only provisions in there that actually raised revenue for the government, that increased taxes, was lowering the reporting threshold for 1099-K on apps like Venmo and PayPal. So it used to be you had to have $20,000 worth of transactions and 200 total transactions, both of those requirements, $200 and $20,000, before you had to report a 1099-K to the IRS. Well, the Biden administration lowered the number to $600 and 0 transactions, roping in millions of more people. The estimate that was going to be between 20 and 30 million 1099-Ks were going to go out to people. Democrats realized the political blowback they were going to receive when it was supposed to kick in this January. Well, the IRS came in behaving politically with really no clear authority to do so, but despite more than 2 years of preparation, decided at the end of the year that they would not require it for this year and kick the can down the road for another year. So it will require a legislative fix. You've had Republicans in both the House and the Senate propose legislation to restore the old thresholds, which obviously is something we should return to. This was a problem Democrats manufactured. There was no issue with reporting from Venmo and PayPal before. This is just another attempt for the IRS to get more of your information and for Democrats to raise revenue from you. And to your point, Grover, again, this is something, the burden is placed on the taxpayer. It's if you sold tickets to a sporting event you couldn't make and you sold those tickets at a loss, or if you had old child's clothes or toys that you sold at a garage sale at a loss for what you bought them, the IRS wants to treat that as income that they can come and tax you on. And the burden's on you to go find the receipts that actually, no, you didn't make money on this, you lost money.
Okay, well, we have an IRS that can't maintain your privacy but wants more of your personal information, an IRS that says they care about taking phone calls and making sure they help you out and service your questions, but actually they're putting their money into more audits and almost nothing into getting phones answered and getting information out to people. We have an IRS, we didn't even go through today, in Ogden, Utah, they destroyed 30 million documents, IRS documents, like a W-2 or a 1099 statement. And they didn't tell anybody about it. It got discovered by one of the investigators whose job it is to make sure things don't go too crazy over there. And it was 30 million documents. If you stacked them up one on top of the other, it'd be 2 miles high. And when the Democrats weren't interested, but when the Republicans asked about it, they said, did you burn them? Did you bury them? Did you shred them? How did you get rid of 30 million documents 2 miles high? And they said they wouldn't say. They did discover that there was a memo to the point as to why they did destroy the 30 million documents, and maybe not why they kept it a secret, but why did they destroy them? And when asked if they could see that article, the memo saying why they did it, they said no, it would reflect poorly on the IRS, so they weren't going to show it to anybody, even Congress, which has every right to look at that and demand that operation. This, plus the fact that the IRS, 100% of their campaign contributions go to Democrats. They fund the modern Democratic Party. They fund Democratic candidates. They have a one-party structure at the union over there, which donates about 350,000 hours, people you're paying I'm paying, taxes we pay, that are donated to the unions, which then go work for the modern Democratic Party. They're running a political machine that violated the law in terms of people's privacy, and their reward by the Democrats in the House, Senate, and the president is to give them $80 billion unaccountable. They haven't even written a plan for how they're going to spend it. They could all go to Mardi Gras with it, and they would, well, we didn't tell you anything different. They didn't make any promises about what they were going to spend it on. They haven't even put in writing what they're going to spend it on, and it's $80 billion. So those are my final thoughts on this. It is probably a bad idea to give this cast of characters the power to have all of your financial data, everything they could imagine, and then they write your tax bill for you, and send it to you. And then if you don't send you money and they start fining you, and then you can call them on the phone and they can laugh at you, and you can try and fix the problem, and they can laugh at you, and you can hire a lawyer to spend more money than the government was willing to take, or you could just pay Uncle Sam and give up for the year. Take care. Thanks for joining us. Grover Norquist here on Leave Us Alone.